Monday and two. We were doing 2 nights a week sometimes too, you know.
And it was uptown at Tyler's Beer Garden, which y'all probably don't know about. That was Magazine and
Yeah, Magazine in Belcastle.
yeah, the owner was Fred Laredo.
He's still around, man. He owns a business across the street. You know, he has a printing business, but he was pretty off the wall. But
You know, to show you how much I was desperate to really learn how to play, Tyler's was not in an area of town where I should have been at when it got dark. Because I didn't drive. I didn't have a car.
Yeah.
So, but I was up there, especially on those nights when the duet took place, and Mr. Marcellus and Steve would let me sit in. And many times I had no idea how I was going to get home. I mean, must have had a guardian angel, because I made it home all the time. I kept my saxophone. Nobody robbed me. And on the bus, that was easily an hour and a half ride home at night at 12:30 at night. So.
Yeah, I know you didn't ride with Ellis because he had that little Honda Civic that when he started up, man, the whole neighborhood was smoking.
Right. And then sometimes I would actually convince my colleagues at Loyola, where I went to undergraduate, I would say, hey man, let's go to Tyler's and get some beer and oysters. I didn't even like oysters at the time, but I know they did. So I was like convincing them to go there, and then I know I could get a ride home at night. So do whatever it takes to get around the music. But you know, I think I was really fortunate at the time when I came up in New Orleans. The Fallberg Maroney was the name of the club at the time.
Fallberg, yeah.
The Fallberg, because Ornette Cobb had played there with Ellis and Johnny V and Chris Everett did the gig.
That's right.
And you know, I grew up with the whole community being all my teachers. I have to be honest about it. I mean, I could sit down and name for hours so many players. You heard me speak about Steve, Johnny V. I could talk about Bill Huntington, who y'all probably never met, who lives in Arkansas somewhere. I've seen him recently. Fred Kemp, Red Tyler, Jermaine Basil, Sadie Blake. She was a singer. I remember I did a 4-female tour to Europe with Jermaine Basil and Wanda Ruzon and Brooks was Juanita Brooks.
Oh, yeah.
Try to remember Juanita's name. And so many. So I grew up in the community, and everybody was really open to really let people come and sit there, especially if you showed a passion to want to be there. It wasn't about how well you played as much as it was a passion to want to be there. You know, and when I think about all that takes place in education today, I think those are the things that's missing. I mean, you all have to figure out, to get really cut to the chase of it, you all have to figure out how to take what's on the outside of the walls of erudition and scholarship and utilize that inside the walls as well. And a lot of students, my students at Northwestern University, where I teach at now, for some reason they think that the message is going to come find them, instead of them going out to find the message. You know, so I think there's a balance of that to be had. I don't think school is for everybody. As a director of jazz studies, people would ask me, why do I say that? Because I don't. I think some people need the organization that school provides. I think other people have the drive, the motivation to go out and get it on their own. You know, we spoke about Winton. Many people say he went to Juilliard. He went there for about 1.5 years. And I'm not sure how many classes he attended either. To be truthful about it. But he studied though. I mean, he studied with Albert Murray. How many people know Albert Murray? It's a great book called Stompin' the Blues. That's one of his mainstays. He's got like 7. Well, Mr. Murray probably had more than that. And he hung out at Duke Ellington's time. I would go to his house in Harlem, and you talk about Ellis can talk. Oh my God. I always had to have reservations. At the time, I was the director of jazz studies at Juilliard. And it's funny how you want to be around something all your life, and then when you're finally around it, things are so busy that you don't get a chance to absorb all of it. I study more now than I studied when I was in high school. And I'm not just talking about music and all kind of stuff. But I would go by Mr. Murray's house, and I'd allot like 2 hours. I knew it was going to be an easy 2 hours of him sharing some information with me, which would turn into like 6 hours. So everything I had to do just got postponed, canceled, and didn't happen. But, you know, I think about those times, it was outstanding. Albert Murray was another one. You know, Wynn tells a story about when he first went to Romare Bearden to ask him to do the artwork for the Majesty, I think it was for the Majesty of the Blues, or either for a set of 3 CDs he called Soul Justice and Southern Blue. And he said he went to Romare Bearden's house, and he was young, so he went with this sketch he had drawn up himself to show Romare Bearden what he wanted. and said when he got to Romare Bearden's house and showed him the sketch, and he looked at Romare Bearden's face, in that moment he realized that was the biggest mistake he had made, and how he had no idea how profound a person Romare Bearden was. But he soon recognized it with his brilliance, and the relationship went on to have many artworks from Romare Bearden on his cover. But the experience goes on and on. However, I always say that education is the exchange between people. So what questions do you all have about anything? Everything is fair game, except salaries. I studied at Loyola, yeah.
And where after that?
Then I studied here in New Orleans, basically making gigs. But I also was a math teacher in high school. I taught high school math at St. Augustine High School, where I graduated from. And that came about not because I have a math degree. I didn't have a math degree at the time. But my clarinet teacher in high school was my mathematics teacher in high school, Carl Bloom. And that kind of motivated me to be a really good math student. So when I graduated with a music ed degree, my mom had one contingency. You have to work or go to school. Well, I hadn't been to school for as much as I wanted to go. I had to get a job. And I didn't really want to get my hands that dirty. I said, well, I can wash the chalk off if I get this gig, you know. So I applied for the job. And that gentleman I mentioned to you, Carl Bloom, who was my clarinet math teacher, I remember asking him, I said, if I apply for this job, you think I'll get it not having a math degree at the time? I was just really good at math. And he looked me straight in my eyes. He said, I don't know if you'll get it if you apply, but I guarantee you won't get it if you don't apply. And that's kind of like my drive about everything, you know. It's okay to apply for something and fail, but you got to go after it. Jason?
I just wanted to ask you, having a math degree helps your composing?
Not really. I think it hinders it sometimes, because then I get too structured. You know, music is not math. That's something else. I mean, we can write 12-tone rolls and all that kind of stuff, but when you start thinking in numbers, it's like in algebra and trig, the process is very deductive reasoning. You go through a process that brings you to an end. But in geometry, it's like inductive. You have to kind of think about where you're going to be. And there's a lot of ways to get to your final destination. That's why some people are good at geometry and not trig, and vice versa. So I always thought the math part of it helped me be organized in terms of the things that I want to do in a certain amount of time. But I found more and more as I have tried to free myself of that kind of structure, I can be more creative in terms of the things that I want to do. It has worked out in my benefit. So that's just my thought about it. You know?
So it's like two different worlds.
Well, they're two different worlds that are together, you know, and that's kind of like my overall thing about life and education. It's like we look around the room, and the first thing we see is that we all are different. But why didn't we look around the room and see that we all are the same? Because we actually are. For one, we're all human beings. Another, we all hear about jazz music, and then we just keep digging, we'll find we have more together in common. So there's an interconnectivity between all of that. So I utilize it when it's necessary to do things, you know. But I also try not to be bound by it, that I have to go into the maze with only one exit. I try to keep my options open so that I can make a detour in the event something happens. It's like playing rhythm changes, then somebody throw the monk changes out at you. Well, if you don't know about the monk changes, then you just got to either wait until they pass, or you got to kind of skate over them like you don't know what's going on. But because you prepare yourself for the possibility of things happening, then you can arrive at different kind of things. And that's kind of like what Train did with Countdown. He took tune up and he found a different type of way to resolve to one. Or Thelonious Monk with a piece called it's like blue.
Yeah, like blue.
Like blue. That tune is about resolution for Monk. And how many ways can I get to the one chord? So he does it through the flat 7, he does it through the 2 chord, he does it by a 2 flat 1, he does it every possible way he can figure out in all of 8 bars. You know, so when you check it out next time, analyze it. And you'll notice that that's what Monk does on that. So the math definitely didn't slow me down. It has its assistive kind of opportunities, but I just try not to let it also box me in so that I have to come up with the same answer every time.
Man, just going back to those Towers days when we used to play the duet with Ellis, that was about a 3-year period, and the thing that always really impressed me about you, it was like every time I don't know how many intervals you would come back, every couple of weeks and come and sit in or something like that or whatever, but you would really just get exponentially better every time you came by again.
I had such a long way to go.
Yeah, but I mean, no, but I mean, you know, it's like, can you speak a little bit about what the amount of time you put into your instrument and how serious you were about just getting it together, you know?
You know, and even now, it didn't seem like I practiced as much as I did. My siblings tell me I practiced a lot. They say, oh man, you used to practice 11, 12 at night. We hated it. And it was 5 kids in one house, you know? So, and none of them play music. I'm the only musician. But I shared it a lot. When I would go and check them out on anybody, if they played tunes that I didn't know, I wrote them down. Then I go home and I check them out. And it was a classic. Then I go back to, I say, I checked out the tunes y'all played last week. Then they play a whole other set of tunes. And then I write them down. That was like the education of it all. That was my jazz improv class.
Yeah.
Or if I
and it was for me too. I mean, playing with Ellis was like you know, I tell him, where did you get your education? I said, playing with Ellis.
Yeah. And when I spoke about Alvin Red Tyler, Mr. Marcellus would always say every time he would do a gig, Red Tyler would find at least one tune he didn't know.
Oh,
he just knew that many tunes, you know.
He knew thousands.
Yeah.
He was the first one that ever taught me Comrade Conrad,
really?
which is that Bill Evans tune it goes through all 12 keys and switches from 4/4 to 3/4, and the whole form of the tune is 196 bars long. And I play with Red on the gig, and it was like he'd take all the flat keys when he got to the sharp keys, he'd hand it off to me. Oh, thanks, you know. Yeah, he knew a lot of tunes, man, Red Tyler.
So, you know, knowing your community is really important. Really, and knowing them well, because then if you know, it's like being in a military environment. You know, different people have different skills. You wouldn't want the cook to be the guy who's a sharpshooter, unless he was really a good sharpshooter. The chances are the cook usually is not the sharpshooter. So, and if you know the people who you have an opportunity to interact with, then you can get the most out of them. And I think that was one of my things. I managed to be around so many people. And I also was not averse to people telling me things. Because like Bill Huntington pulled me over once when I was at Loyola. And the short answer was like, look, when you got a lot of talent, don't sit around and do nothing with it. So as a result, I utilized that. And I talked to him, when I saw him last, we talked about that particular time. So, just so many people, you know. So.
Yeah.
What instruments we have up in here? Drums, right? I know you wasn't carrying somebody else's cymbals. Piano. Bass. Okay, cool. All right. All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry about your knee.
Sorry.
My lady had knee surgery this summer. I know what that is. Would you like a chair?
No,
Put
it's
your
all
phone
right.
up
I
there.
think
All right. Okay, what instrument do you play?
I sing and
You
I
sing.
play the guitar badly.
Okay. All right, and I see something. Is that trombone or guitar on your back? Guitar. Okay, great. Okay, so, you know, we're just kind of talking because I feel like rather than regurgitating information about stories on the road, and I can do some of those, but if you all have specific questions, that'll help too, you know. You know, I got to play with Danny Barker one time, I'll tell y'all that. That was like outstanding. And I played clarinet and saxophone. And I was always, you know, in early New Orleans music, there's a lot of squeaking and squawking on the clarinet. But I studied classical clarinet too. Or clarinet, I should say that different. I studied classical music on clarinet. I always say there's no such thing as a classical clarinet. There's a clarinet that you play classical music on. So, and I never liked that whole playing the squeaks that's on the record and all. They did that because that was how they played at the time. And I'd like to believe they had the opportunity to study with some of the great teachers that I had, then they would be able to make choices to do whatever they squeak or not to squeak. But I never did a lot of New Orleans gigs on clarinet when I was younger. And Di Vappy and I used to do a duo gig at the Esplanade Ball back in like the 80s. And one time Don couldn't make it, so he sent Danny Barker. I was like, oh man. And I didn't know a lot of New Orleans tunes either. So Mr. Barker was just so kind, you know, and tolerant and education. It was a whole, 3 hours with Danny Barker. And it don't get any better. And I remember the final thing he told me, he said, man, just keep playing. Don't worry about what everybody said, just keep playing. You know, keep it positive at all times, and music will figure it out, help you figure it out. So that was my Danny Barker experience.
How have you managed to grow musically through Lincoln Center and then in academia and running a jazz department? How do you do that?
Well, I have pretty good multitasking. You know, I tend not to have much procrastination in terms of the dialogues that I have with people. You know, I have a gig coming in Chicago when I get back, and I'll be anonymous because y'all might know the person playing with me. But, you know, the gig is all set up. It's going to happen. It's all outlined. All the musicians have to do is come and be there and do the job. But this one person is asking like 100 questions. And it's not like the first time that person has asked 100 questions about the gig. Every time we play together, they ask 100 questions, the same 100 questions. And today, you know, I just got a very full plate with being here and going to rehearsal. I got some work to do from Northwestern and all. And I just say, hey, can you just relax? It's gonna be okay. I said, I hired you because I knew you could do the gig. So when someone hired you to do a gig, you have to find that balance of their personality in addition to yours. Because Christian McBride said it one time best. He said, I tend not to hire people who's gonna make my gig difficult and unpleasurable. No matter how well they play, it's a chance to play. And if you're playing, that's suggesting you're gonna have fun. And I wanna have fun. I don't wanna be managing that person. So I finally said, hey, can you just relax? How's the piano gonna be? I'm like, the first question I asked when I got to the gig, I'm a saxophone player, I said, is there a piano? You know, I remember being at Edge with Mr. Marcellus one time. And I said, hey man, let's go to this jam session. He looked at the door, he said, oh man, I'm going back. I said, why? He said, there's no piano in there, man. I'm out of here. It made sense to me. So you have to learn how to fit in when you inside of these environments. And if people call you for a gig, they probably called you because they had the confidence that you can do the gig. Or even the confidence that you will learn from doing the gig. Because like one of my first gigs in New Orleans was with James Black, Emile Vanette, that was Emile, right? Played piano? Yeah, okay, and George French. And we played on Audubon Place. You know, uptown, that little, that gated community area. It might have been for the president of Tulane University or somebody. And I was like a senior in college. We're playing there, James Black, and we played all kind of popular music too. We're not playing jazz standards or anything. We played popular music stuff. And then at the end of the night, they wanted us to play some overtime. So George said, hey man, you know how George is, he said, hey cousin, can we make this overtime? And James said, yeah man. Emile said, I'm sure he said yeah. And for whatever reason, I didn't say yeah as quickly as James said, look man, if you're not gonna make the gig, you can leave. We're gonna make the gig. You know, I made the gig with him obviously. But you know, it was just always that learning kind of thing. So with the whole thing of these things coming together, for me, being an educator has allowed me to be a student. Especially as a mathematics teacher. In order to teach it, I had to learn it. In my first year of teaching, I had an advanced class. It was an honors class. I don't know why the principal put me with that class. It was so smart. Oh man. So I went up and I remember the first day I was ready. I had my lesson plan together, just like all the stuff that they teach you, right? And I'm doing the math problem, but then the students, because they were so smart, they were also very, very cunning to want to be intellectually challenging. So they would do it in another way, and I would just look at it. I'd be like, then I had to make a decision. I was like, now I can tell them that's wrong, but I really don't know if it's wrong. Then came a moment of truth. I said, I'm gonna be honest. And I said, okay, look, I don't know how that goes. I'm gonna write that down, I'm gonna study it tonight, and we're gonna go back over tomorrow. That took place every day for a year. They took pride out of showing me ways to prepare, you know? And so every day was like that. So I'd walk down to the hallway, well, I'd be happy, I'd be coming back like, it's like something negative, you know. And my teacher was still teaching that, so he said like, rough day at the office. I was like, yeah man, I said, you mind going through these problems with me? So every day I'd have another tutorial with him. But those kids taught me a lot that first year. So the second year, my teacher's son was in my class. So when they tried to do that, I said, no, man, look, your colleagues last year taught me everything I need to know about this. I encourage you all to deal with business. By then, I had the confidence to do it. And the same thing works out when I'm trying to deal with the music to try to be more informed. For instance, here's a question. Can anybody tell me about Sonata Allegro form? Okay, everybody in the room, is everyone in the room a music major? Yeah, okay. Are we're gonna say?
Just in general? Or
Yeah, what is the form of Sonata Allegro form?
The theme and the development and recapitulations, it's
Okay.
kind of three-section form.
So that first one is not just called the theme, it's called the exposition.
Exposition.
The exposition. And most times in classical music, in Sonata Allegro form, the exposition is repeated.
Yeah, it's
repeated. Then you have this development section where you see all the chromaticism going along, right? And then you have this recapitulation with a recap of the beginning. Can you tell me any tunes in jazz that reflect that?
that exact form.
That exact form.
Oh.
So many of them.
Yeah.
ABA is also not a Allegro form.
Yeah.
But education teaches them so different instead of bringing them together. The first time I realized that, we did a video called Marcellus on Music at Tanglewood with Seiji Ozawa, great conductor of the Boston Symphony out there. And we played, I think we played one of Grieg's pieces. And it was the first time I had realized how similar what happens in both worlds go on. You know, through composed pieces, well, that's like free jazz or something that the melody never repeats itself. All those forms, it's all music. So once I started to realize it was all music, you could take things from all over the place, you know? I mean, like, what are the three elements of Indian all music? Anybody? Rhythm?
Harmony and melody.
Harmony and melody, yeah. Which element distinguishes all music from each other?
The harmony.
How many people say harmony? Raise hand. Well, you got to at least raise your hand. You said harmony. Okay. How many people say melody? How many people say rhythm? Okay, it's rhythm. Because if you play funk, chop, you play in reggae, you play in Brazilian music, let's say. If you play in African, play jazz, ching, 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 ching. So the rhythm distinguishes everyone from the other. That's why we have all these dialogues about what is jazz. You know, how many people are jazz studies majors up here? Cool. What is jazz?
What is jazz? I'd say jazz is just like a form of music where it is mostly defined by like the self-expression and the improv. I feel like that makes
Well, the
jazz.
Grateful Dead feels like they got a lot of self-expression up here.
Well, I mean,
They in it, man. Okay. Any other thing you want to put with that?
I think it's a feeling, like it's like the rhythm.
So Beethoven had a feeling.
But I think like okay, well, I don't know, maybe I don't have the right.
Maybe you need to put a little bit more thought into that, right?
Probably.
And I'm gonna tell you why I asked you that. You came to school, you said, I'm gonna spend 4 years studying jazz. Maybe you wanna know what you're going to study.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to ask more questions. And I have my graduate students at the end of their 2 years with me write a paper about jazz. And they still have many times different perspectives from me. But I also say you have to defend your position. You have to have a defense for it. I mean, you know, many times you have all these categories of music. You know, you think about snarky puppies. Then there's this guy play on the internet, do these other kind of things. Or a student of mine, John Robinson, plays with a group called The Dead Don't Die. I'm like, yeah, that's a dark title for a group, you know. But you know, all of these things, and you can do whatever you want. You know, you just need to be able to identify what it is. And unfortunately for our music, everything falls under the umbrella. But how can everything be any one thing?
Because it's all the same.
You think it's all the same?
I think a lot of the music is really a lot of the same things, just played in from different perspectives, so you have different genres. But you know, a lot of it kind of comes back to the same roots.
Do you think that the utilization of different elements of music still make them all the same? Just because you use the elements of one set of music, do you think it makes it the same for all of them? Dun, 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 dun. That's Stravinsky, the right spring. What's the main thing that you hear me doing up in there? Dun, dun, dun,
It's like
dun,
accents
dun.
on
And what is that called in music?
Syncopation.
Syncopation. So he used syncopation. Does that make his music jazz? But he went down probably in the east side of New York or down in the Village and checked out all the jazz musicians and started using that. Aaron Copland definitely did that. And all this, this the Appalachian Spring. You know, so it's still, we still have all of this kind of things coming together and whatnot. Is it important that we identify what it is? I don't know. I mean, it's important for commercialization and monetizing what you do, you know, but is it really important? To some people, they would say yes, and others would say no.
You know, Roger Dickinson,
Of course, I think.
Roger Dickinson, he's a contemporary of Ellis Marsalis, but he's more from the classical world, great composer. We were having a similar conversation, and he came up with this question that just really made me think. He says, well, is jazz a noun or a verb?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, yeah, okay, well, I never thought of it that way. You know, it's not maybe it's not a thing, maybe it's a way of doing things, the way you treat.
Well, it actually was a way of doing things in an earlier time that was derogatory.
Oh, yeah, well, that, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not going back to that.
No, we're not going to do that.
That was a very thought-provoking question.
Yeah, but you know, Roger has a very interesting exercise for those who study with him. He says, write a sentence that says, if I could tell you, I would tell you. You take lessons with him?
I haven't, but I've
You heard about this?
If I could, I would, yeah. So,
Yeah, but if I could tell you, I would tell you. You say, and write this out as many times as you want. And often, you know, I fell victim of it. I would write this thinking that if I could was the verb, and I was a noun. If I could tell you, that was a pronoun and whatnot. But then as you get into it, he said, well, if I could tell I, you would tell could would tell would tell if, and if would tell you, if I tell you, if I could tell you. Now, how do you utilize that exercise? Well, that's a form of improvisation, of freedom. And he has a description of stuff he calls miming. Like I played a piece for him of a clarinet concerto I wrote recently. And he listened to it, he said, oh yeah, man, that's nice. He was kind, he said, that's nice. He said, but you can do a lot more mining. I said, what do you mean? He said, mining, you know, like when miners go out and dig, when they hit gold at one level, then they try to go deeper to find some more inside of that. So the challenge many young musicians have, and certainly I fall in that category and I'm not young anymore, but you try to get a bag of licks that you can play. But there's only so much you get. But just think if you had one lick and you developed it 1,000 ways instead of 1,000 licks one way, then you can say a whole lot of stuff. If you could just continue to develop that idea on and on. So,
yeah.
I got away from your question, but I took a different path. But you know, it's all been really interconnected for me again too. Like I'm working on a PhD right now.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
and I'm ABD, all with dissertation, but I'm also tired. Because I was working on it while I was on the road, and man, I'd be in the wings of a stage reading before the concert. We'd be going through, I remember once we were going through the airport in Dubai, and if you weren't in class, you had to write a paper about what you missed, and I hated writing those papers. So I was walking through Dubai airport with my phone, and the people in the class were like, man, where's he at? I could hear him saying it, I'm going through the airport, I said, I gotta get this plane. We were late too, I just gotta get this plane in 10 minutes. But the fact that I was there, I didn't have to write the class. And you know, it was just, that has opened up my thinking in a whole nother way. It's giving me an empathy for students, not sympathy, empathy. I feel for you, but I don't feel sorry for you. You know, and my students would say, oh, Mr. Goines, I couldn't do it because I had a paper due last night. I said, now we got something in common. I had mine due last night too, it was due at midnight. I stayed up all night to get it in by that deadline. You should have gotten yours done, F. You know, so I can understand where they're coming from, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna give them any leeway. I still have expectations of them.
Are you traveling with 'Cause I know like, Winton, like they have like Lincoln City, like,
Yeah.
like the big band. Are you on the road with them?
Yeah, I've been doing all of them. I've maybe missed 30 gigs in 28 years.
So how do you do that in your, like your school schedule? Like, do they do the traveling on the weekend? Or
No, we just came off a 7-week trip. We did 7 weeks on the road, then we came back for a week, then we did 2 more right after that, then we came back. So that was like 9 weeks. So the how though is it's kind of like talking about the business of jazz, you know? They say, I'm trying, if you knew about the movie Mo Better Blues, I can use that as an example, but you're kind of young for that. But you should go check it out. That's Spike and Branford and all of it. But, people who are promoters and think they'll say, I'm never in a position to want to renegotiate a contract. So, whenever you get in the position of negotiating something, you have to ask for everything you want on the front end, because chances are you're not going to get it on the back end. Perfect example, in modern times, is the NBA, Scottie Pippen. Did you see The Last Dance?
Yeah.
He signed his contract for something like $18 million. It was
It's like over 2 years.
but he had different reason for it, because his family and wanted to take care of them. So when in 1999, I got a call from the president of Juilliard asking me to come up and be the director of jazz studies, to start this jazz studies program there. And one of the stipulations of it was for me to continue to play in the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra while I ran the program. For them, it was primarily to offset some income. Because if I did that exclusively, I probably would ask for more money to quit my other gig. But for me, it was great because then I could still be out here playing and not doing that, doing both. Now, that was there, but so when I came to Northwestern, I used that same point of interest to get that gig. I said, look, I'll come and rebuild your program, but I'm going to stay on the road with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. And it's worked out well over the past 14 years I've been at Northwestern. We've only had one snafu up in there one time where I didn't feel like it worked out with administration, where I thought it should have worked out. And I also just put it on the table. I said, the next time we get at this crossroad, I'm out. But so you have to ask for what you want on the front end. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. You have to present it. So we've talked. I've asked somebody else this next question that's associated with yours. What's the most powerful word in a negotiation? Anybody?
No.
That's it. No. Why is it a powerful word?
Because it shuts down whatever they're trying to get you to do.
That's right. And more importantly, from your perspective, you have to be willing not to do it. You have to put yourself in a position where you're comfortable if you don't do this stuff, whether it's financially, artistically, emotionally, and not let it overwhelm you. So many times, that's why artists who represent themselves fail so often, because they have a passion to play, so they don't do too well on the negotiating side. But then someone who has a manager, especially if you get on a roster with other people, that manager has the leveraging ability, like let's say Anne-Marie Wilkins. Does anyone know Anne-Marie Wilkins? That's Harry Connick Jr. and Branford Marcellus' manager. And there are other people under that umbrella, but those are two that I know. So there would be two things up in there I could come off right at the bat that would be good. One would be good and one would be bad for being on that roster. One is that whenever the gig was good, Branford's going to do it. Well, I have 2 saxophone players. I'm gonna put my big money person out there to do that gig. That would be the negative. What would be the positive? Well, let's say she was trying to get me into certain clubs. She would say, well, hey, look, Regatta Bar in Boston. If you put Victor Goines in the club this week, I'll make sure you get Branford down the line, or Harry Connick, or something like that. So all those negotiations are happening against each other. So when you're out there by yourself, it's like being on an island by yourself. And it doesn't mean you're going to fail. It just means you have to work a lot harder to make those things happen. But you have to be willing to say no at some point in time and deal with the consequences of it. There's a saying, we all have freedom of choice, but we don't have freedom of consequence. And the consequences are whatever they are. Thoughts? Yeah. Anybody get it? Don't raise your hand, just ask. That's what being informal, yeah.
So, were you ever in a position where you had a manager, or were you always working kind of with
I had a manager for a little while, a lady named Sharon Winston, who used to manage Marcus Roberts. And, but then it requires you to understand the business in a different way too. Just because I had a manager didn't mean I had a booking agent. You know, you have to know the roles that people play. You know, like if I ask you, what's the role of a producer? If you get a producer for a recording, what's the role of the producer?
To help you put your idea, produce your idea, basically,
Right.
do the nuts and bolts of building it into something that you can listen to.
Right. Okay.
Or
a lot of things nowadays. Seems like it's a lot of things nowadays. It used to be, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, more like arranger, more on the side of and dealing with the actual recording process. But I feel like nowadays it means so many things.
Well, in fact, it's always been one thing that was responsible for so many things. You know, like Delphia Marcellus is a producer of so many of Branson and Whitney records. Okay, now, what that means is that he had to make sure that everything that needed to be in that studio throughout the entire day was there. That the studio was rented, there was a time that the artist wanted it, that the chairs were set up. It didn't mean he had to move the chairs, he had to make sure the chairs were there. That lunch was gonna be there on time, and maybe he had somebody else allocated to make sure lunch would be where it's gonna be at, or this and that. So the producer's the one who oversees everything. Does the producer mix the record? Could. Doesn't mean they won't, but they could.
Well, like they delegated it.
They delegated because, why did they delegate it?
Can't do everything.
Because you can't do everything. That's exactly, and there's probably someone with more expertise who can listen at like Patrick, what's Patrick's name?
Smith.
Patrick Smith, who worked on the Tonight Show with Bradford, did a lot of work with Dalfield. He still works with so many people. So, you know, all of us have a strength. And the key is to understand what your strength is so you can exploit that, but then understand what your weakness is so you can develop that. Don't run away from your weakness, run into your weakness. Because then if you can identify that weakness, you say, I need to make that better. Like for instance, you know, I'm a good math guy. I use Grammarly to write. You know about Grammarly? The writing program. I write with Grammarly. Okay, now what's the benefit of that? If I really want to make sure my paper is right, I write it out, I check it with Grammarly, then I give it to somebody I know can really write. And then I let them put some better words up in there, and then I go back over and I look at it, maybe I'll tweak a couple of things to make it sound more like me. But I understand my weakness is, it doesn't have to be the weakest of weakness, but it's a weakness, is writing. So I try to improve on my writing, but then I seek people out who can help me in that particular regard. You know, so you gotta know what your strengths are, you have to know what your weaknesses are. Yeah. You know, if nobody wants to ask questions, you can ask, keep asking.
How did you, what was your, your start? I know you're in New Orleans, so you're playing around, but what was you would say, your start that got you lunch?
I can't tell you what was the exact one, because I was doing gigs when I was in high school. We used to have funk bands. We all played in funk bands. You know, we had mine was called The Creators. They had one, Whitney played it. Mine was called Fantasy. Whitney had one called The Creators. There was another called Vietnam that Chris Everett played in. And Leroy Jones played in a funk band back in that time. I mean, everybody played so many bands. Oh man, Chris had this big indignant fro. You remember those days. And, you know, I mean, so we did gigs like that. We made money. You know, then we would play with Doc Paulin's band. That was a gig. You know, what's the town player's name? Roderick is dead. And then there was the, what was Danny Barker's thing called? The Summer Street Baptist Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fairview, well, that was the church. Yeah, Fairview.
So
Baptist
Harold
Church.
Riley played in that particular, he played trumpet back then.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it didn't pay a whole lot of me, you know. Yeah, there was a guy named Sigmund Walker. You remember Sig? He was a piano player. Everything he played had whole tone. Sigmund would say, oh man, Whitney and I talk about it all the time. Hey man, we're going to rehearse at the Union, and we'd rehearse like X amount of times. We're going to have a gig. Then we're going to do a gig. There'd be one person there. We split like $5 between 15 people. 50 cents. You know? But we did it all. Then with Willie Metcalf. He had this place that he was teaching at the Y on Dryas, right? So that was another neighborhood, you know, you had to get out by sundown. That was not a good place to be. So, but it was a good place to be if you wanted to check out what Willie was dealing with. And Willie probably, in modern times, was our Barry Harris. If you ever had a chance to go to Barry Harris's in New York. That's what Willie was doing at the Y. So all of those were gigs that I did, you know, that led up to ultimately making the jazz gigs that I wanted to do. I do remember, though, how I got to play with Mr. Marcellus, though. I was my senior year at Loyola. Winton had come in town from a tour with Herbie and Hart Blakey. We were hanging out, and I said, hey, man, what do I need to do to get this right? I gotta get this right. He said, man, go take some lessons with my dad. So I said, okay. So, and I knew his dad over time because we had played in elementary school, honor bands, and all that together. And Winton and I actually went to kindergarten together. So I approached Mr. Marcellus about taking lessons. He agreed to teach me, and I remember he told me for $25 a week, which was at the top end of what I had, which I felt was at the low end of what he should ever take. You know? But he did. And then after about a year, he said, hell, man, you know, I'm going to put this band together. Man, you want to play? I was like, is that a rhetorical question? Yeah, I want to play. So and he did. It was me, Reginald Veal, Noel Kendricks. You know, drummer who lives in Atlanta now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering what happened to him.
He's in Atlanta, yeah. And Reginald Veal is Reginald Veal. He's everywhere. He lives in LA now, I'm told. And he played with Winton for a long time as well. And we did that for like 3 years until Mr. Marcellus moved up to Virginia Commonwealth when he took that position. And then I actually followed him up to Virginia Commonwealth. That was prior to UNO time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then I followed him up there and got my master's at Virginia Commonwealth. And I moved up to New York afterwards. So.
Did you go to NOCA?
That's a good point. I didn't go to NOCA.
Okay.
But I hung out around NOCA all the time.
Okay, I was just wondering.
At that time, you couldn't go to a private school and go to NOCA.
Oh, I see. I got you.
For whatever reason, the Archdiocese didn't let you do that. The
okay.
first person in that was in the Catholic school to do that was Harry Cotty.
Oh, okay.
But you know, he had certain weight in the form of a DA for a father.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh.
You know, and
Yeah.
there's a funny story on that one where Harry has a record called 9 or something like that, right? When he was 9 years old. And so and it's done with a lot of the guys who were on Bourbon Street at the time. So they say one time his dad brought him down there, you know, the club owner saw the DA. So I don't know if he knew who the kid was and the relationship and the kid was trying to get in the club, and the club said, that kid can't get in the club. DA was saying, he can get in the club. He can get in the club. He can get in the club. Went back and forth. Ultimately, Harry got in the club. But I guess he had to pull out his DA card on him, you know. He gets in or everybody get out. So, or like also, you know, another funny story, they say James Booker, piano player, he was incarcerated. But they say the DA would go get him out of jail and bring him home to teach Harry.
Right.
You talk about clout.
Yeah, I know.
Having some inside tracks, you know, didn't hurt. So that's a couple of them. But that's kind of how things went for me, and I got to that band, and then I've been very blessed since then, I have to say. But I work hard, and I still, like you mentioned, I practice. It's a known fact on the road. Know who's rooming next to you. You know, like our piano player, Eric Reed was the piano player at the time in the septet. And I remember we checked into a hotel once, and I checked it before Eric. And then when he got his key, he said, where's Vic? And his brother next by, he said, oh, hell no. He's going to practice. I want to go to sleep. So it was like common knowledge I was going to practice. You know, and it's still like that for me.
That's good. Yeah.
Are they the only band that you're moving with right now?
Yeah, but I just came back from Croatia. And I went out there to be a guest artist with the Croatian radio and TV band. So I did a week out there. We did 2 concerts. So our schedule is really busy though, you know, so.
I follow them.
Yeah. So there are times when we can do other things, and there are times I do a lot of other things. I try to stay busy as much as I can. You know, I try to stay fresh, I try to stay relevant. It's a plus to be with Jazz on Lincoln Center. And it's not a plus to be with Jazz on Lincoln Center.
Is it just because like how busy everything is?
No, because people make decisions about you through their lens.
Right.
The way they see you, they'll say, well, you play that old jazz of Duke Ellington. they pigeonhole you as being this person, or you are the clarinet guy, I've gone through that thing with jazz at Lincoln Center I did that for about 15 years, and then finally I kind of saw the light of what was that. I mean, Wendy and I used to have these intense arguments about, dude, man, I played tenor too yet. He said, hey, man, play the clarinet stuff. So we went through it for a long time. And then I had this epiphany one time. If you go, I'm gonna ask you, if you go to the supermarket and you want to buy some steak, you say, I like to buy 5 pounds of steak. And the butcher say, great, let me give you this fish. And the first thing you're gonna say is what?
That's not steak.
I asked for steak though, right?
Yeah.
So, I thought about that that metaphor of going on. So when Wynton called me in 93 to do the gig, he literally said, I want you to come out, you need some help? You got it? Okay. We're a full service organization here. He literally said, I want you to come out and play clarinet with the band. And I said yes. And I said yes, but I didn't really register completely what he said. Then I fast forward 15 years later, and I'm just sitting there, I was like, that's why he's always asking me about playing clarinet. He asked me to play clarinet. He didn't ask me to come out and play the tenor chair. He asked me to come out and play the clarinet chair. When I finally came to those terms, then it became like a piece of cake to make the gig. Didn't mean I didn't like playing tenor, but it just mean I understand what the job was. Yeah. He bought steak, he didn't buy fish. So I had to give him what he wanted. And then when I gave it to that, guess what? I was able to get the fish too. So, but I had to actually give what the job was asking for. And our relationship has always been great, don't get me wrong, but it's even better now. We're really tight now. So make sure you understand what people are asking you to go out and do when you do gigs. If they say, well, I want you to come and play the music of Benny Golson, don't go play Train, just because you think it's hip. You come play some Benny Golson and say, I want you to come play this. It's a perfect example. I want you to play at this engagement party. Okay, I remember we played this. It was Ali Jackson's gig, and Ali Jackson's a great young drummer. Carlos Enrique is a great young bass player. But let's face it, that gig started out with Tito Puente, Wynton Marsalis. I mean, it's like the high echelon gigs. They didn't do wedding receptions and funerals and all this kind of stuff. So we're playing this engagement party. And, they're picking 7 steps to heaven. So at one point, somebody said, let's play The Lady is a Tramp. I said, no, don't play that. He said, man, nobody's singing that. I said, but somebody might know the melody. That's the same suggestion.
I know the lyrics.
Right. So we didn't play that Needless to Say. I said, man, come on, y'all got to be more. Play something better, New York, or something like find some tunes that's going to be much more acceptable. But it kind of told me that they didn't climb that ladder. It just ascended from ground level to some level up there, 7 or 8. And that I'm happy for them, but there was a great benefit of learning through those levels to get to 8, because I kind of experienced all of that through there, So a lot of gigs, and I still try to do as many gigs as I can now.
And you playing around? What's like the scene in Chicago? Do you have time to do that when you're home, or are you trying to catch up?
I do some. I have to kind of balance it because, you're always fighting off that local musician thing, and I at one point I could have been playing as much as I want every week, but then I finally said, if you're doing it every week, unless you're Ellis Marsalis at Snug Harbor, where it's not only a local audience coming in, but a tourism, they coming in through the club. Would you say, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but just imagine, it might not be the same for Ellis Marsalis, but another musician at another tier, who's playing every Friday night at a given club, then there will be a fall off of audience because it would be difficult to keep that draw all the time of people coming in. And as I realized after a while of doing it so many times, people probably made decisions. They said, oh, look, man, we ain't gonna worry about catching them this week. We'll catch them next week or the next 2 weeks. I said, well, if that's your vibe, I'm gonna play every month or every 2 months. I'm gonna put a demand inside of this. I'm always trying to figure out the business of how to make this work. So, if you put in supply and demand, that's basic of economics, elasticity and all of that. I failed economics in college. I'm much better at it now. When you get to the real world, you might not know the terms, but it's the same thing. So yeah, I get on the Chicago scene and all that. So when I go home, I have I'm going to do like an educational event to teach some young kids that I have not met. The guy at a place called the Barrington White House, which is on the west side of, I guess it's the northwest side of Chicago. I've not met him yet. He wanted to have an event for his young kids in the area that would have education throughout the day and then concert at night. So I set up a program that we're going to put together. And we're going to go out and do that. So we'll teach from like 1 to 6 with some breaks inside of there. Come together. The kids will play 3 songs and then I'll play 3 songs with them. And then we'll play a quartet gig after that for about 45 minutes. And that'll be the day. So it should be great.
Is the showcase still open?
The showcase is still up in there. Wayne is running it now. Joe passed away. Yeah, Wayne Siegel. There's another club that I like called Winters. Leroy comes up and plays it at least every year now. He's due up there pretty soon. I saw the advertisement. And there's a lot of clubs.
Scene up there.
Yeah. But it's also a lot of cliques.
Yeah.
And in reality, I've been there 14 years. I have not done one gig as a side band. Now I don't know why people don't call me. There's myths that say, "Oh, he's too expensive. Oh, he's not available. Oh, he's this." I was like, call him and see. And then we'll know what he is, He's still a working musician, so.
One thing I appreciate about the audience is there, even in smaller clubs, is that people are respectful and very quiet.
Oh, you're talking about the Green Mill now.
Well, no, I'll tell you where, but I've been with friends, locals there to, listening rooms, and people are very respectful and quiet.
But a listening room is different. Like there's a club called Andy's. That's not a listening room, man. They drink and they're loud in there. They're so loud. One time I tried to play a song for a couple who got engaged, and I wanted to play a ballad for them. I asked the house. I was trying to get people's attention to hey, can y'all be quiet for one song while I play? I lasted about a chorus, and then everybody was back up loud, But on the flip side of that, when I say the Green Mill, you know about the Green Mill in Chicago. Now
But Tyler's was loud too.
Yeah.
They talked during the gig at Tyler's.
Right. Well, the Green Mill is such that it was a place where Al Capone and so many others frequented during this time and during Prohibition, and it's exactly the same way, nothing different. So I played there one night. I had a piece that we were featuring called the MLK Suite. It's funny too, and we got to the ballad part called "Oh Lord Save Us." So it's really soft, just the piano and the soprano playing. And I heard somebody say, "Stop doing that to me." I'm like, oh shit. So I said, I'm gonna keep going. But by then I could see people who are in positions of order converging on the situation. So I keep playing it. Then another sound come up, "Hey man, do that." I said, so I stopped playing. I stopped saying, "Hey man, this is the MLK Suite, baby, non-violent resistant," The audience broke out in laughter. And so I started back up playing again. In the meantime, Dave Gimelo, the owner, and Chris, the manager, and all of them were over there moving people. And look, when they decide they're gonna move you move.
Yeah. Dave Gimelo, man.
So bears. That's right. So he's moving about the door. The last thing I heard from afar, like way out in the distance, "He started it!" We just kept playing. So, you get all kinds of things. But I kind of got that from Mr. Marcellus too, because I've been on some gigs with him. He's been unmoved by the things that happen. Storyville, for instance. Storyville used to stay open really late. Is it still called Storyville now?
I don't know.
On Decatur?
It's not there anymore.
No, it's not there.
It's not there. Well, there's a club on Decatur right off of Esplanade. Luther Kent used to play a trick bag. Late night sessions, man. I mean, it would go 4 or 5 in the morning. And one jazz fest, we had a gig that started at 3. I don't know why we did this 3 o'clock in the morning gig. We played from 3 to 6. And it had about to be like 6 people in the club. And we're playing, and the stage was kind of high in Storyville. So this woman walked on the stage, and I was standing next to Miss Marcellus. But when she walked up, I stepped back. And she looked at him and said something, and he was soloing, and he looked back and said, "No." I was like, "Wow, okay, cool, man." It didn't phase him in the least bit. He was like, "No."
Wow. Well, Victor, man, it's great talking with you and reminiscing, and it's fantastic. I know you have to move on because you got that rehearsal today. And then tell us what you're doing. I mean, Victor's playing at obviously the Sandbar tomorrow night with Brian Seeger's group.
Yeah, we're going to do 3 tunes. We're going to do, I thought it would be only appropriate to do some Ellis Marsalis music. We're going to do Syndrome, Swinging at the Heaven. We're going to do When First We Met. I think that's a piece he wrote for his wife. I've only heard him play once or twice when I was with him. It's a beautiful ballad. It's in the Silver Book. I know the Silver Book is circulating all around. It's out like a Harold Baptiste. That was one of his main projects as he was here at UNO to get that published. And then we'll do a quartet gig of Jason Marcellus, Jason Weaver. The first piano player didn't call, so I called somebody else that I can't remember, but Jason Marcellus recommended him. So, who he is.
Oscar?
No, I called Oscar. He didn't respond. Let that be a lesson.
Oscar.
I called him yesterday. He didn't respond. I called him this morning. He didn't respond. So I went down the list.
You got a piano player sitting right here.
Yeah, man. So, and then after I got off the phone with the other guy, he called. I was like, "Hey, man, you too late now." Let's see, Jason Marcellus. I called Ryan Hansler.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's a good player.
Yeah, you'll like him.
Yeah. So
Cool. All right. Looking forward to that, man, for sure.
And we're going to play whatever we play.
Are you doing Snug too? Or no.
No.
Just too much jazz festival stuff going on right now. Huh? Yeah. Anyway, how about a hand for Victor Goines?
All right.
Yeah.
Good luck with everything.
All right.